Students, we are working on Chapter 5, Part 2. So this lesson is 5.5. So we're looking at Chapter 5, Lesson 5. This one's all about percents. So our learning target today is going to be I can convert between percents and fractions. All right, so in our green math book, we're on page 220. We're at the top, it's got a key idea for us. It says writing percents as fractions. A percent is a part to whole ratio where the whole is 100. So you can write a percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. And then they show us what that looks like in numbers as well. So let's go ahead and write in the special word percent. Talk about what exactly that looks like. A percent is a part to whole comparison where the denominator is 100. And every single time, if you're looking at a percent, the bottom number of the fraction or the denominator will be 100. If you think also about the percent symbol, this is the percent symbol. And if you look at that symbol, there's really a 100 hidden in there. The slash bar kind of looks like a 1 just slanted over. And then this little circle and this little circle, if we just moved them over, it would be the 2 zeros in the 100. So that's how I think about the percent sign equaling 100. So we need to make sure that goes on our denominator when we're creating fractions. For example, if I have the number 60%, if I were being asked to write that as a fraction, this is what it would look like. The 60 would go on the top of the fraction, and the denominator has to be 100. There's our 60, there's our 100. And then if you wanted to simplify that, you could, and that would end up equaling 6/10. Let's say you divided by 10 here. Divide by 10 on the top and bottom, you'd have 6/10. We can actually simplify even farther. So if we divided the top and the bottom by 2, we would end up with 3/5. So 60% is 60 over 100, or 3/5. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at our examples. So for example 1, it says writing percents as fractions. There's 3 parts to it, and I'm actually going to add a 4th part to it that's not in the book, but I think it's super important to know how to do. So let's start out with the ones they give us. A says write 35% as a fraction in simplest form. So we're going to take 35% and write it as a fraction in simplest form. So remember, the number we see goes on the top of our fraction. And then the number on the bottom is 100 because of this percent sign. And now we'll simplify. So we have to think of a number that can go into 35 and into 100. And 5 can actually go into both. So if I divide the top by 5, I end up getting a 7 on the top. If I divide the bottom by 5, I end up getting a 20 on the bottom. And there is nothing that can go into 7 that can also go into 20 evenly. So our final answer to 35% would be 7/20. Looking at example B for number 1, write 100% as a fraction in simplest form. So here's our 100%. We're going to start it out the same exact way. The number we see goes on the top, and then 100 goes on the bottom. Now we have the same number on the top and the bottom, so we can divide by 100 to simplify, which gives us 1 over 1, or 1 whole. So 100% of something is 1 whole of it. Moving on to part C from example 1. This one says write 174% as a mixed number in simplest form. This is an interesting one because normally when you're working on an assignment, it's very rare that you end up with a 174% as a grade. That would be a lot of extra credit if you ended up with that. We are going to start exactly the same way as we did up here. The number we see is going to go on the top, 174. Then we're going to put it over 100. And now if you notice, the top is bigger than the bottom, so this is an improper fraction. So we will have to take out some wholes and simplify. So let's see, 100 can go into 174 one whole time with 74 leftovers. So that's my first step in simplifying. Get it as a mixed number. Now we'll take a look at 74 over 100 and say, okay, what can go into 74 that can also go into 100? Well, let's see. If we divide the top and the bottom by 2, what would we end up with? We still have our one whole. And then 74 divided by 2, 2 can go into 7 3 times. And then 2 can go into 14 7 times. So we end up with 37. 37 is half of 74. And then if we cut 100 divided by 2, that would be 50. Now that we have 1 and 37 over 50, we are done because there is nothing that can go into 37 that can also go into 50. So 174% as a mixed number in simplest form would be 1 and 37 fiftieths. This next one I'm going to give you is one that's not in the book, but I think it's kind of important to be able to think about. What if we had something like this, 0.25%? And they wanted us to write that as a fraction in simplest form. Well, if we start it the same way, we end up with a decimal on top of a 100, just like we did up here. Now, when we're talking about fractions, it's not very common to have a decimal within a fraction. So what we're going to do is take the 0.25 and get the decimal out of here. So 0.25, in order to get the decimal out of here, we have to move it 2 times. So get that decimal moved twice, which means we have to do the same thing to the bottom number as well. If we take this decimal, which is ending on the number right here, and move it 2 times, we have to fill in these empty slots with zeros. So what 0.25 over 100 really means is 25 over 10,000. So we just converted this into a fraction that we can actually simplify. So now I know that there's a number that can go into 25 that can also go into 10,000. And actually 25 can go into both of them. So let's divide the top and the bottom by 25 to get this as simplest form. 25 divided by 25 would give us 1. And let's see, 25 into 10,000. Well, 25 can go into 100 4 times. And then we have these 2 extra zeros that we would put on the end. So 0.25% as a fraction would be 1/400th. If I were you, I would pause the video and take a look at the on your owns at the bottom of page 220. Okay, if you tried the on your owns, number 1 would be 1/20th, 1 over 20. Number 2 would be 1 and 17 over 25. Number 3 would be 9 over 25. And number 4 would be 83 over 100. Glancing now over at page 221, we have another key idea at the top. It says writing fractions as percents. So now we're actually going to be working the opposite direction. This time they give us a fraction, and we're going to have to work backwards and write it as a percent. It says write an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. Then write the numerator with a percent symbol. So if we take a look at number 2, it says writing a fraction as a percent. Write 3/50ths as a percent. So we'll jot down example 2 in our notes. And this one only has one part. However, I am going to add another part to it. So we're going to actually label this part A, even though it's not like that in the book. We're going to take 3/50, and we want to write that as a percent. So If we remember from above, a percent is something out of 100. So if we converted this into something out of 100, that would give us our percentage. So if we think about how we get from 50 to 100 by multiplying or dividing, well, 50 times 2 would give us 100. So we were going to do the same thing to the top. 3 times 2 would give us a 6 on the top. So if we have 6 over 100, my percentage is sitting right here. So I'm going to write my final answer as 6%. So once you get your fraction into something over 100, your percent is just sitting right there for you, 6%. And there is not another one for example 2, but I'm going to add this one to your notes because what if we have something that doesn't easily go into 100? Like 50, you can just multiply by 2. That's pretty simple. But what if you have a number like this, 3 over 16, and we wanted to write that as a percent? Well, if we're thinking about 16 times something to get us to 100, that doesn't work very easily because it would probably end up being a decimal. So I'm going to teach you now how to use your calculators to find a percent. So what we do if we have a number that doesn't easily go into 100 is we follow these steps. On your calculator, you do top number divided by bottom. So I'm going to say top divided by bottom. And in this case, we would go 3 divided by 16 on our calculators. Then the second step is you take that number and you multiply by 100, since 100 is our denominator of our percentage. So 3 divided by 16, get an answer, and then multiply that by 100. If you did that on your calculator for this example, you would end up getting 18.75%. And that would be our final answer to what 3/16ths look like as a percent. We have one more example today. Number 3 is our real life application. So we'll switch colors and take a look at that one. Okay, probably need a new page here. So taking a look at example 3, it says a drought affects 9 out of 12 Midwestern states. What percent of the Midwestern states are affected by the drought? So essentially, they're trying to get us to decide what 9 out of 12 looks like as a percent. So let's jot down what we have. They tell us there's a drought, and it's affecting 9 out of 12 states. So if we wrote that as a fraction, we would have 9 over 12. They want us to write that as a percent. So what would that look like as a percent? Well, we know that the bottom has to be 100. So let's think about this. We want to get 12 to 100. What would we multiply 12 by to get 100? And while there's not really anything super easy to multiply 12 by to get to 100, so we're going to follow the same steps that we followed up here in this example using our calculator. So remember, we're going to take the top number and divide it by the bottom number. So we're going to take 9 and divide by 12 on our calculator and get an answer. Then we take that answer and multiply by 100. And what we end up with on our calculator is 75%. So 9 out of 12 is the same as saying 75%. So in this drought, what percent of the Midwestern states are affected by the drought? We would say 75% of Midwestern states. If I were you, I would pause the video at the bottom of page 221 and try out some on your own. Okay, if you tried them out, number 5 is 62%, number 6 is 28%, Number 7 is 95%. Number 8 is 150%. And number 9 is 100%. And that brings us to the end of video 5.5%.